Hello, Ravens fans, and welcome to our men's basketball season preview. I'm Aaron Schneider, the Sports Information Director at Anderson University, and joining us for our season preview is head men's basketball coach Owen. How are you doing today?
Good, Aaron. Thanks for having me on.
Good. Same for you. To give a brief introduction, Coach Handy is entering his 9th season with the team. He has a career of 100 wins and has 77 conference wins. The men's basketball team has made the conference tournament in the last 6 years, and they are also the only school in Indiana to receive the NABC Team Academic Excellence Award in the last 5 years. So to kick things off, obviously we're dealing with a much different looking season this year with the pandemic going on, and I just wanted to know kind of on how the pandemic has affected your season.
Yeah, so I think, Aaron, there's two big ways that it's impacted our season. Obviously, there's a panoply of ways that it's impacted the college experience. But as it pertains to basketball, besides having stuff shoved up our nose on a more than weekly basis, there's been really two kind of big ways it's impacted our season. And I'd summarize those as people and practice. So we've got a very different roster than we expected to have a year ago at this time. We have two veterans, Maurice Knight and Tate Cooper, who are taking the year off and will return to our team next year. We have one veteran, Dalton Du Bois, who had a season-ending surgery, and one newcomer who's of local interest, Caden Key, who had a season-ending surgery. So there's 4 guys right there that we expected to be a part of our team this year. They're all still a part of our program, but they're, Maurice and Tate are off campus, Dalton and Caden are on campus, but aren't going to be playing this year. And then in addition, from a people perspective, we've had a number of guys who have gone in and out because of a quarantine, and because of a typical, short-term injury. So our people look different than we would have expected. And that's not a bad thing necessarily. It's just different. And all those guys, I think, have made really good decisions about what they're doing, and we're supportive of them. So in terms of practices look different, partly because we have not had the preponderance of veterans in practice we would have expected. So the freshmen we've had some veterans, but the freshmen have had to learn without, having most of the players in the gym have college experience with intensity, communication, that sort of a thing. And to this point in the year, we've had almost 50 practices, and we've only had enough players to play 5-on-5 in practice 5 times. So we've gotten really good at our drill work. We've got really good at executing isolated skills or discrete skills when we isolate those skills. What we haven't gotten to do a great deal of work on is contextualizing skills. And obviously, basketball is a 5-on-5 game. So to contextualize a skill, you've got to be able to recognize it, communicate it, and execute it at full speed. And we just haven't gotten to do a lot of that. So as we approach the season, a lot of the learning that typically would take place in a 5-on-5 context in practice is going to have to take place for us in a 5-on-5 context of games. So in some ways, we are going to inherently be behind, not with skill development, but with contextualization of those skills. So I've been thrilled with our players. They've done a great job. They've had a really good attitude and made the best of the context we have. But our context has been less than ideal, as has everybody's right now. So it remains to be seen how those things impact us. But I think they will in a pretty significant way.
Okay, and then so jumping into first kind of our returners for this year, we the big players to watch will be Austin Lyons and Ronnie Williams, obviously. So, but kind of jump into more of your returners for this year.
Yeah, so we have 5 returners, Austin and Ronnie being the 2 who have played the most, and then Michael Rogers has played quite a bit. Michael took the fall semester off and is back this semester, but has not yet practiced with us. And then Phil Bessick is the returner. Phil has been dealing with not a major injury, not a minor injury. So Phil has not practiced a great deal to this point. So really, Ronnie, Austin, and Cade Gentry, who's a sophomore, but did not receive an abundance of playing time last year. So Ronnie and Austin, to this point, have been really our two college experience veterans in terms of minutes played. Both have done an exceptional job. You know, Roddy has some natural leadership qualities. He's as good as I have coached in terms of his attitude and effort every day in practice. You know, I can chew on Ronnie pretty hard in practice, and it doesn't change his effort, doesn't change his attitude. He gives his best to what we're doing regardless. And so that's been no change from Ronnie, no change from normal. He plays hard. He's a really competitive guy who does so many things for us. And then Austin, it's been fun to see him grow into that leadership role. You know, he had played almost none as a freshman, started every game for us last year as a sophomore, but really had a secondary offensive role. And so he's had to grow into more of a primary offensive role for us this year. Obviously, there's a process associated with that, but to see Austin's growth in that area and to see his growth as a leader has really been a lot of fun for me.
Okay, and then going into with our newcomers, obviously with the differences that we've had to deal with as far as COVID, being able to have the number, not just a number, but the quality as well with your newcomers, it is definitely a nice trade-off to have. So go into kind of your newcomers that you would think to have an impact for this year.
Sure. Yeah, and Aaron, I love the way you explained that. I think in an ideal world, we'd have everybody who is capable of being here, right? But we don't live in an ideal world right now. So we've got to take the context we have and do our best within that context. And to that end, man, I'm thrilled with the progress that our newcomers have made. We've got a really talented group, a couple of guys who are, frankly, ahead of where I thought they would be at this point. I would say the two who have stood out the most to me, both of whom we expect to start on tomorrow. Gavin Dowling is a freshman forward who has an incredibly skilled arsenal of post moves. He's a great passer, and he's a really, really smart player. So he picks stuff up quickly. He's not afraid to be vocal. So I expect right out of the gate, you know, for people who have seen us play in the past, we've had some really good low post players. Nate Gross, Cole Hartman, Dalton Du Bois. Gavin's going to step right into that type of role for us. And he's going to execute it at a really high level from the start. So the other guy that I anticipate starting tomorrow is Fred Shropshire. Fred's a freshman out of Springfield, Ohio. And for people who have followed Anderson basketball for a while, he's a friend of Jim Scobie, who's one of the all-time greats to have played here. So Fred is a point guard. He was a first-team All-Ohio player last year. He's really good with the basketball in his hands, protects possession, makes great decisions, and he's sort of a natural scorer. He's a very good catch-and-shoot player, and he's a guy who can score off the bounce. He's got a good mid-range game, and he's pretty crafty around the basket. So there's two guys that I plan to start tomorrow who I think are gonna help us right away. Camden Smith is another guy who's played really well. Jordan Gaddis is another guy who's I've been very pleased with. Jordan is sort of a Swiss Army knife in that he does a lot of things well. He's always playing hard, does a great job of moving without the basketball. Drew Luce is a shot maker, still growing into our defensive expectations for him, but he's super coachable. I believe Drew's going to make a lot of shots for us before he graduates. Francis Uzor is a newcomer who's a transfer. Francis is a tank. He's really well put together. He's another guy who will play a forward role for us. He's 10 days in, joined us at the semester, so he's behind in terms of his learning, but he picks up stuff quickly. He plays really hard, and he certainly doesn't look like a freshman with his physical presence on the court. And then Alex Hunt is another guy who looked really good in practice early. He's been out now for a couple of weeks with an injury, but I think and hope he's close to returning. And another guy who's going to make a pretty big impact for us as a newcomer.
All right. So jump into the outlook on kind of the HCAC for this year. Obviously, we're going into just a standard conference tournament that includes everyone. It's going to be a blind draw, so we'll have a different dynamic on there. That being said, we do have projections on the with the polls coming in. Anderson was picked to finish 5th, Transylvania being the favorite, followed by Rose, Holman, Franklin, and Hanover going in the 2 through 4 spots. As far as Anderson for competing within the conference, relative to its opponents, but as its team itself, what are your kind of goals and expectations for this season?
Yeah. So, Aaron, I honestly have no idea what to expect. And I don't mean I have no idea what to expect from our team. I think to vote in a preseason poll this year, I understand why we do it. I'm not being critical of the fact that we had it. At the same time, I didn't even know how to vote in the poll, right? I mean, I don't know what teams have what players returning. I can look on their websites and see a roster, but we don't know who's going to be in, who's going to be out, who's healthy, who's not healthy. We don't know what teams are going to get hit by a positive test and shut down. So to make prognostications in a year like this, to me, is sort of a fool's errand. I think from my perspective, for our team, I don't have goals. My goals aren't about where we finish in the conference standings, because, again, some teams might play all 12 scheduled games. Some teams might play 0 or 4. Some teams may be missing guys at various points in the year. So to set goals in a year where so much is unpredictable, to me, is a hard thing to do. My goal would be that when the conference tournament rolls around, our team is as good as we can be at that point in time. And I think if we're as good as we can be at that point in time, we've got a pretty competitive franchise. What it takes for us to get there is not to go too up and down with wins and losses. Sometimes we're going to look good, we're going to play well. Sometimes we're going to be out of rhythm. Sometimes we're going to be well prepared for an opponent. We don't have sideline inbounds plays in yet, to be honest, for Thursday. We'll inbound the ball and play offense. If we have a late shot clock sideline inbounds, I'll probably burn a timeout. So, there's some things like that we just haven't gotten to yet that are going to impact as we put those in. So to me, our goals for the season are all about the growth of our team, the development of our newcomers, making sure that we stay focused on getting better every time we practice, every time we play. So when the conference tournament rolls around, we can be at our best. In some ways, an unseeded blind draw conference tournament is like an Indiana high school sectional. And when I talk to high school coaches in Indiana, they obviously have conferences they'd like to win. They've got teams they'd like to beat. They've got county tournaments, things like that. But what all of them want to do is be at their best when the sectional starts. Because other than winning a state championship, progressing the tournament, there's nothing more important in Indiana high school basketball than winning your sectional. And to me, that's our season. So I won't always coach the same way I would in a quote-unquote normal season, because my goal this year is for us to be the best we can be when the conference tournament starts, not necessarily to win as many games as we can prior to that point. In a regular season, that's my goal. But this year, if I think to be the best we can be at that point in the year means me playing some newcomers more early at a cost, I'm willing to make that trade-off. So in a typical year, I might pull a guy for turning the ball over 2 out of 3 possessions. This year, I might push him to play through the mistake and learn from it and grow. So, there's some different outlook in how we approach it this year, all things considered.
Mm-hmm. And I think you kind of covered many of the items on why the conference decided to say, standings don't matter. We're just gonna go into the conference tournament. It also creates some of the things that you discussed, where you might be able to put more emphasis on just the development, given the kind of season that we have. And as far as the being at the best at the end of the season. That was something I know that you talked about near the end of last year, where it seemed like Anderson was clicking at the right time, and then we saw how that worked in the conference tournament, where we were in the semifinals with Transylvania, pretty right into it, where we wanted to be.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that would be a good time to talk about. So going into our upcoming matchup with Transylvania, obviously they're the defending conference champions. They're picked as the favorite for this year. What is your expectations for that matchup this year?
Mm-hmm. Well, like we've discussed, there's a lot of unknowns there. So we would have anticipated before the season Transylvania starting Brandon Cromwell and Michael Jefferson as their two guards. Jefferson's a returning player, was a first-team all-conference player, really, really talented. And Cromwell, I think, led the league in scoring amongst freshmen last year. I could be first or second. He was right up there as a freshman scorer last year. So two really talented guards. Well, Brandon played their first two games and hasn't played since, and Michael did not play in their last game. So we don't know. We're going into the game not knowing if those two guys are playing or not playing. But again, that's sort of a function of the season. We're not always going to know, and both teams still have to pass our COVID tests to know we're going to play tomorrow, right? So we'll test after practice today, and Transylvania will test prior to the game. So I expect a really tough, well-coached team. I mean, they also return two forwards, Larimore and Gentry, who have been really good players for them the last couple of years. And they start another senior forward in their starting group. So they're veteran, they're experienced. Coach Lane's teams are always very well coached. They tend to throw a broad variety of defenses at you. So you could sometimes see 6, 7, 8 different defenses in a game. And it's hard to prepare for that much when you have a veteran team, right? And we're looking at preparing for it with a team that's predominantly newcomers. So how do we chop that down? How do we present it and prepare them in manageable chunks? And then we always expect a diversely skilled offensive group from Coach Lane. They'll spread the floor. Pretty much everybody he plays can shoot the basketball, and you see a lot of motion, a lot of ball screen stuff, and then they run a handful of really, really tough sets that are counters to their motion that can be tricky to recognize. Again, tricky to recognize when you're rolling juniors and seniors out there. We've got to learn to recognize them quickly with freshmen and sophomores. So I definitely expect a stiff challenge out of Transylvania Thursday and Saturday. But I think, and Aaron, this kind of leads into the question about the format. One of the things I love about the format, we're going to play Transylvania Thursday, have a day to practice, and play them again Saturday. I love that format because we're going to be able to immediately evaluate how we execute our game plan, give feedback, and take another crack at it and see how we can grow immediately. So when you think about a good pedagogical model, you've got homework, you've got quiz, you've got homework, you've got test. So let's measure our learning and see how we're doing, see how we can grow. As a coaching staff, that's going to measure how well are we doing preparing and then teaching and reteaching. And for our players, it's going to challenge their focus on those fundamental core concepts of our game plan that we're trying to execute. So to me, it's a great model for a young team to get that immediate learning feedback and growth opportunity.
And that's well. That was one thing I wanted to make sure it was covered, and I think it's well explained. I'm glad that I see that it looks like it could be a positive experience. And then, so finally, before we go for everything, I just my last question is, what does your team need to do this year to be successful?
I think it's having that growth mindset, and we've done a great job of it so far this year. I think success a lot of times over the course of a basketball season is about being able to keep your pulse even, right? When you play really well, you don't get too high or overconfident. If you have a day you don't play well, you move on from it quickly. So I think, to me, that's a big part of it this year. We're going to have ups and downs. We're going to have times we look good and feel good, and we're going to have times we don't do a great job. And we're going to have to move forward quickly, learn what we can learn, and focus on the next opponent, focus on the next practice, focus on the next preparation, so that, again, when we get to the conference tournament, we're at the best we can be with this group this year. That's our goal. And to do that, we've got to have a short memory. We've got to learn what we have to learn and focus on our next opportunity.
All right, I think I've covered all my questions. Ravens fans, thank you for tuning in. Be sure to follow along for the season previews that will soon be coming, and obviously tune in for our matchup with Transylvania tomorrow on the live stream. And then, Coach, thank you for joining us, and good luck tomorrow.
Hey, thanks for having me, Aaron.